How you doing there? Welcome back to Babble on Talmud. Today we're studying Daf 78, Daf Ein Ches of Masechta Zevachim. Friends, Daf Ein Ches is amazing. Daf Ein Ches is Daf Ein Ches is pretty awesome. It talks about mixtures, essentially. Kind of like, it gets into min b'mino, min b'she'eno mino, but from a unique angle. You know, we've had the privilege of learning about mixtures of these sorts in Masechta Avodah Zarah. We learned all about it towards the end of Masechta Avodah Zarah with min b'mino, min b'she'eno mino, no sein tam. And what's interesting is that, you know, when we learned about mixtures of these sorts in Masechta Avodah Zarah, and also in other places in our learning together over the past 6 years, generally speaking, I think mixtures have been from the angle of taste, of the sense of taste. That you have a mixture and you say, well, is it no sein tam? So you have a heter, and mixed into the heter you have a shtickle isser, and you're saying, well, is the isser going to be bottle barov? We'll say, well, if it's no sein tam, if you can taste it, then it won't be bottle in the mixture. What's interesting about the angle that we're going to be looking at today is that it's not from the angle of taste, it's from the angle of sight. Now, I think sight is one of the 5 senses, right? So I think I was chazering the senses earlier today in my head. I think the senses are, I think it's sight, smell, taste, hearing, and touch, right? I think so. And then there's the 6th sense, which is, I think that's like seeing dead people, right? So, generally speaking, mixtures, I think, are often classically thought about from the sense of taste, right? No sein tam, can you taste the isser in the heter? What's going to be interesting about today's daf is going to be sight. It's going to be visual. That in our case, when you have blood of a korban, dam of a korban, and then the blood gets mixed with water. And now we have a mixture of min b'she'eno mino. You have blood, you have water. And we say, is it still kosher? Can you go weiter? Can you do zrikas adam? So we say, well, look at it. Does it look like blood? Does it not look like blood? What happens when blood gets mixed with wine? Now it's min b'mino. Right? Meaning when it was blood with water, it was min b'she'eno mino. When it's blood with wine, they're both red. So we're defining the same types as really the same colors, and we're trying to understand what does it look like visually, and we're looking at mixtures from that angle. So in my opinion, it's a very interesting daf. It's a new way of looking at mixtures, which I thought was extremely interesting. It was a little bit difficult. There's going to be a lot of details. There's going to be a lot of details on today's daf. It was a little bit hard for me to boil it down into like slides and into chapters, because there's just so much here, and it goes in like, you know, it zigs and it zags in different directions. So all I kind of came up with was really just visual mixtures. But we're going to see lots of details, lots of really interesting details on today's daf, in my view. So in my view, as opposed to my taste. So, Chevra, here we go. Let's jump into Daf Ein Ches. I'm pretty excited. I hope that you are as well. Here we go. Friends, we're going to begin on Daf Ein Zayin Omid Beis at the Mishnah, 4 lines from the bottom of the Omid. Says the Mishnah, Dam Shnesai B'Moim. If you have blood of a korban, and the blood of the korban gets mixed together with water, and the shaila is the blood still kosher? Can you do zrikas adam with such blood? Im yesh bo mariz dam kosher. Look, if it looks like blood, it's kosher. So kind of like what I was talking about in the introduction. You have this mixture. It's be'etzem min b'she'eno mino. It's blood mixed with water. And whereas, you know, if we're talking about a stew that some chalev got mixed into or something like that, So the shaila would be, so it's, you have the stew and you have the chaylev, and the shaila would be, well, does it taste like chaylev or not? If it tastes like chaylev, even though it's a minority of the mixture, it would be also because the chaylev would be felt. So over here, what we're saying is that if you have this mixture of red blood with clear water, so even if the blood is the minority, even if it's mostly water, but it still looks like blood, it's going to be kosher, right? So in this mixture, what's important is how it looks. Now, here things get very interesting, very, very interesting. Nis'ariv bayoyin. Now, what happens if the blood gets mixed with wine? So now it's min b'mino, it's red with red blood, red wine. So listen what the Mishnah says. Roin also ki'iluim umayim. Wow. So the Mishnah says that if blood gets mixed with wine, red with red, min b'mino, so what you do is you view it as though it were min b'she'eno mino, in able to create some kind of a contrast of different colors, so that we can then make a observation, analysis, conclusion about what it looks like, about color. Meaning, you have dam, you have yayin, you have blood, you have wine, red and red. So what happens in this case? How do we determine if the dam is kosher, if you should do zrikas adam? Well, so that's min b'mino, red and red. What we do is we view it as though it were min b'she'eno mino, as if the wine were water, and if the same volume of wine were to have been water instead of wine, so with that amount of water, would it still look like blood or not? If the answer is yes, it would still look like blood, so then it's kosher. If the answer is no, it would not, then it's possible. So when we have this situation of min b'mino, when we have a situation of red blood and red wine, what we do is we sort of convert it into min b'she'eno mino. We view it as if it were blood and water, so that we can then, I don't know what the right word is, so that we can then make a decision. We can then observe whether, right, as blood and water, we can then determine if it still looks like blood when mixed with water. If it still looks like blood, so then it would be kosher. So again, with blood and with wine, we view it as if it were blood and water, so that we can then make a decision about if it would still look like blood, in which case it would be kosher. If not, it would be pasul. If the blood gets mixed together, so the blood of the korban gets mixed together with the blood of like a goat or let's say a deer that are chulin, okay? So the blood of the korban gets mixed together with chulin blood. So nachamol, we view it as if it was water, so that then we can make a determination if it would still look like blood and if it would be kosher. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, ein dam mevatel dam. Rabbi Yehuda says that blood cannot be mevatel other blood, meaning so long as there is some of the blood of the korban, of the animal that's being offered, so then the blood is kosher, because blood of the behema, with the blood of the behema or the chaya would be unable to be mevatel the blood of the korban, and the korban and the blood of the korban would still be kosher, according to Rabbi Yehuda. Nis'ayv b'dam psulin. If the blood of the korban got mixed together with pasul blood, for example, the blood of a roveya or nirba, or chutz lizmano or chutz limkomu, pigel, if that pasul blood got mixed together with the blood of the korban, yishafech la'ama, you spill out all of the blood into the amma. The amma was a stream that ran through the Azara, that ran through the courtyard in the Beis HaMikdash, that would go out to Nachal Kidron, it would flow out of the Beis HaMikdash, and the blood, this blood of the korban that got mixed together with puzzle blood, so you can't use the blood. The blood is puzzle, and you just have to spill it out into this stream, into this ama that will flow the blood out of the Beis HaMikdash. B'damatamtzis, if the blood of the korban gets mixed together with damatamtzis, of course, damatamtzis is opposed to dama nefesh. Dama nefesh is the blood that squirts out of the neck of the animal when it is slaughtered. That is the blood that we want to be working with. But that's the dama nefesh. That's the blood that we want to be working with. However, if the dama nefesh that we want to be working with gets mixed together with dama tamtzis, which is blood that is not from the initial squirt, so yishafech la'ama, so again, all the blood needs to be spilled into the stream that will take it out of the Beis HaMikdash. You can't use this blood. Rabbi Eliezer machshir. Rabbi Eliezer says it's kosher. There's going to be machlokes in the Gemara on tomorrow's daf about is Rabbi Eliezer arguing both with regard to puzzle blood as well as dam atamtzis, or only with dam atamtzis. Imlo nimlach v'noson kosher. Now, however, even according to the Tanakama, who says that by dam psulin and by dam atamtzis you spill it out into the amma. However, if you didn't ask the question so let's say the blood of the korban got mixed together with some dam of a pigel korban, and you went ahead anyways, you didn't ask anybody, you went ahead and you did zrikas dam, it would be kosher, because as we're going to see in the Gemara tomorrow, the reason to say that it's possible is really just a gezerah, and if you went ahead and you didn't ask anybody and you did zrikas dam, we would say that it's b'diavad, it is kosher, because the only reason to say that it's possible is out of concern. It is a gezerah that we will get to tomorrow. Okay, I'm going to drink a stick of water and then we'll go weiter. Okay, now, says the Gemara, Amar B'chia bar Abba, Amar Reb Yochanan, says B'chia bar Abba, the name of Reb Yochanan. Lo shanu ela, shenaflu mayim lesoch dam. Okay. When our Mishnah is talking about does it look like blood, does it not look like blood, right? There's a mixture of the blood with water, does it look like blood or not? That's only if water fell into the blood. Rishon bottle. But if it was the other way around, if there was water and the blood was falling into the water, so as each drop of blood is falling into the water, it is being bottled. The water is being mevatel the blood. Right? So if you have a base of water and it's the blood that's falling into the water, as the blood is falling into the water, it's being bottled and bottled and bottled. The first drop becomes bottled and it becomes kilu now added and part of the water. And the second drop is now being added to the water. It's all being added to the water. But if it's the other way around, that it's water falling into blood, so we say that, I think the idea is that as the water is falling into the blood, it's being bottled. However, at a certain point, if it no longer looks like blood, so then we're going to say that you can't, that it's possible and you cannot do zrikas adam with it. But if it's the blood falling into the water, as the blood is falling into the water, it's being bottled and you can't use this mixture. Rav Papa says, Rav Papa le'inyan kisui eino kain lefisha ein dichui b'mitzris. Very interesting. Rav Papa says by kisui adam. Kisui adam is a suga that we're going to get to in Masechta Chulin. We have to first, of course, finish Masechta Zevachim, learn Masechta Menachos, and then we get to Masechta Chulin. In Masechta Chulin, there's a parak called Kisui Adam. Kisui Adam talks about covering blood. Who could tell me what Kisui Adam is? I'll drink while you think about it, I'll drink a little water. Kisui Adam is that after slaughtering a bird or a chaya, right, a bird or, for example, a deer, so the blood that's on the floor, you need to cover with dirt. Yeah, it's a mitzvah midaraisa. So now says Rav Puppet, even though we say over here by Zrikas Adam that if the blood fell into water, it would be bottle, and you would not do Zrikas Adam on this blood. However, if we're talking about Kisui Adam, if there's a puddle of water on the floor and you slaughter a chicken and the blood falls into the water, or let's say you're shechting a deer and the blood from the neck of the deer squirts into the puddle of water, we would not say, oh, well, the blood's falling into the water, and as it falls into the water, bottle, there's no Kisui Adam. No, we would not say it there. How come? Because lefisha ain't dichui b'mitzvahs, because there's no dichui when it comes to mitzvahs. Kisui Adam is a mitzvah d'oraisa, that when you slaughter a bird or a beast, right, like a chay or an oaf, so then the blood is on the floor, you have to cover it with dirt. V'chisau ba'afer, you have to cover it with dirt. That's a mitzvah d'oraisa. And when it comes to mitzvahs, there's no dichui. Meaning, even though, technically speaking, we would say, well, you have a puddle of water on the floor, and you slaughter the deer, and the blood is squirting out, and the blood gets on the floor, lands in the puddle, and we'll say, well, as the first drop of the deer blood lands in the water, it's bottle. And the second drop is bottle, and the third drop is bottle. However, but that's what we said by Zrikas Adam, right? That's what we had said with regard to our Mishnah with Zrikas Adam, that if the blood is falling into water, then it would be possible. However, by Kisui Adam, even when the blood is falling into the water, and we'll say as the first drop goes in, bottle, second drop, bottle, third drop, bottle. However, because we're talking about the mitzvah of Kisui Adam, do you need to do the mitzvah d'oraisa of covering the blood? So what happens there is that, sure, the first drop of blood falls into the water and it's bottled to the water. So it's just water, it's not blood. But when that second drop of blood falls into the water, as Rashi explains, it joins with the second drop, joins with the first drop, and like reawakens, rejuvenates that first drop. And now we're saying, okay, so now we have 2 drops of blood versus the puddle of water. Is there enough blood? There is the blood bottled to the water. We say, yeah, 2 drops is not enough. But then comes the 3rd drop, and the 4th drop, and the 5th drop. And each time another drop of blood is being added to the puddle of water, we're making a new cheshbon. It's rejuvenating and connecting with all the blood that's already there. And we're saying, now is it still bottle, or maybe it's a rove now? Until when there's enough blood from the neck of the chaya, of the deer, that all of a sudden now this is a pile of blood. It's no longer a pile of water. We would say that, okay, there would be Kisui Adam. Since Kisui Adam is a mitzvah, there's no concept of dichur. We're not going to say that, well, as the blood is falling into the puddle, it's being bottled, and therefore it's not shaykh to the mitzvah of Kisui Adam anymore. We don't say that. Rather, as each blood lands in the puddle, we are reevaluating, right? The blood is joining together with all the blood that's already there, and we're making a new cheshbon. Is there enough blood here that it would be the majority, that we would consider it blood, that would be shaykh to Kisui Adam? However, I think the point is, when it comes to Zrikas Adam by a korban, I think the point is that there's no, mitzvah of Zrikas Adam to the extent that, if you don't do Kisui Adam, if you shecht a deer and there's blood on the floor and you don't cover it, you're being mavatal mitzvah sese. There's mitzvah sese if kisei adam. If you don't do it, being mimatal mitzvah sese. By zrika sadam, if you don't do zrika sadam, I think the point is the person, the supplicant, the person bringing the korban wouldn't get his kapara. I don't think it'd be mavatal mitzvah essay per se. So therefore, when it comes to kisei adam with his mamash mitzvah essay to do, so we say ein dichoy etzel mitzvahs. There's no dichoy by mitzvahs, and as each drop of blood is falling into the puddle, it's rejuvenating the other drops of blood. And if ultimately the rove of the puddle is blood, or at least it looks like blood, we would say that there's a mitzvah of kisei adam. Masha ein ken by zrikas adam, as the blood falls into the puddle, or by zrikas adam, as the blood falls into whatever water was there, we would say that the blood is being bottle, and there would be no zrikas adam in that case. Amr Rish Lakish says Rish Lakish, hapigul va'anoser. It says here ve'atome. Now Tosfos Taka doesn't have ve'atome, and I think I'm gonna. We could read it now, whatever. But in explaining the Gemara, I think I'm just gonna focus on pigul and noser. It'll make it easier to explain the Gemara with two variables rather than three. But it says Rish Lakish, pigul, noser, tame, shebalon zebazo. So I'm just gonna focus on pigul and noser. So if you have pigul and you have noser, let's just say meat of. Should we say meat? Well, for now, let's just say meat. Okay. So you have meat that's pigul, right? So you were slaughtering a korban, and you said, I'm going to eat it when I'm not allowed to eat it anymore. So then the meat is possible. If you eat it, you'll be chayiv. The korban is possible. If you eat it, you'll be chayiv kares. Or if it's noser, if you didn't eat the korban within its allotted time, and now the meat is left over, you're not allowed to eat it. If you eat it, you chayiv kares for that as well. So if you have, let's just say for now we're talking about meat for both of them. We'll get soon into figure out if we're talking about min b'mino, min b'shena b'mino. But anyways, for now, let's just say you have two korbanos, meat, and one of them is pigul, one of them is noser. You have a kazayis of pigul, kazayis of noser, and you put them both in your mouth. So you have a kazayis of pigul, a kazayis of noser. Each one are chiyuv kares. Shebalon zeboze, you mix them together. Ve'ochlon, and you eat the pigul and the noser together. Potter, you are potter. Potter for makis. If somebody says, hey, you're eating pigul, you're going to be chayiv makis for eating pigul. He's not chayiv makis because efshur shelo yarbe min al chaveru vivatlenu. Shma mino tlas. From here we learn three things. Wow, this is awesome. So says Rish Lakish, if a person takes a kazayis of pigul and a kazayis of noser and puts them together and sticks it in his mouth and eats them, and somebody says, hey, wait a second, don't do that, you're going to be chayiv makis. He won't be chayiv makis. The reason is because as he's chewing this, so as he's chewing the pigul and the noser that he put into his mouth, so they're getting mixed together in his mouth, and it's creating a mixture in his mouth as he's chewing it. And and as the mixture is mixing, so you can have one of them is going to be, you can have a majority, it becomes a mixture. It's getting mixed together as you're chewing it. And I guess as you're chewing it, I guess you're going to, more of the pigul will initially be chewed than the noser, and you'll have a mixture of more pigul versus noser, and therefore now you have this mixture of pigul and noser. The pigul is the rove, the noser is the miut, the noser is bottled to the rove, and it's as if it's now being included in the rove, and it's as you're chewing, so then more and more noser is being added to the rove of pigul, and it's basically all just becoming pigul. Now, you did, but you didn't know that for sure this is how it's going to happen. Maybe it would be the other way around. Maybe as you would do it, as you would be eating it, there would be more noser, and the pickle would be the minority, and it would be added to the noser, and it all just becomes noser. So meaning, because as you're chewing this pickle noser situation, it's all getting mixed together, and you're going to have at some point one of the two items is going to be the miut, the other one's going to be the rov, but we don't know which one that's going to be. Is all the pickle going to be bottled to the noser? Is all the noser going to be bottled to the pickle? Who knows? And therefore, when this fellow is warned, hey, don't eat it. You're eating pickle. You can be chayiv makis for pickle. It's asra safek. We don't know that he's chayiv makis for pickle. Maybe the pickle is going to initially be the miut being added to the rov of noser, and just keeps on being added to the rov of noser, and really what he's left with is eating noser, not pickle. So because we can't know exactly what to warn him for, and it's asra safek, right? If he's warned for pickle, who knows if it's going to be pickle? If he's warned for noser, who knows if it's going to be noser? Maybe the noser will be bottled to the pickle. So therefore, this fellow is potter from makis, since it's asra safek, we don't know what to warn him for. So again, Amr Ishlakish says, Ishlakish, ha-pigol va-noser. If a person takes a kazayis of pigol, kazayis of noser, and puts it in his mouth, shabal and yacha, zebaza, he mixes them together, v'acholan, and eats them, potter, so he's going to be potter from makis, because he efsher shelo yarbe min al chaver vivatlenu, because he's going to be potter from makis, since as he eats it, the pickle and the noser is going to be mixed together and be creating a mixture in his mouth, and we don't know if the pickle is going to be bottled to the noser, or if the noser is going to be bottled to the pickle. Therefore, we can't know what to warn him, and therefore he's potter from makis, shmamina tlas, and we learn out three things from this. Number one, shmamina isur mevatlin zezeh. Number one, and this is going to be important for the end of the daf. By the way, my plan is to get all the way to the bottom of Ayin Tesam Aleph, because there isn't really, it's just kind of one flow until then. Now, at the very end of today's daf, which ends at the bottom of Ayin Tesam Aleph, so we're going to see that this is taka machlokes about is an isser mevatel another isser. But we see from Rish Lakish right now that certainly his opinion is yes. Right? You have the isser of pickle, you have the isser of noser, and they're being mevatel each other, right? If the pickle is the miut and the noser is the rov, if the pickle is the miut, the noser is the rov. So the rov of noser, which is an isser, is going to be mevatel the miut of pickle, which is also an isser. So we see that an isser could be mevatel an isser. So again, shmamina isur and mevatel zeh. We see that isur can be mevatel one another. Shmamina, and we also see no sein tam birov lav deiraisa. And we see that no sein tam birov is not deiraisa. So I was saying earlier that that they're both meat, right? That the pickle and the noser, they're both meat. They have one korban that was pickle, one korban that was noser, they're meat. But here we're talking about no sein tam. So no sein tam by definition is min b'she'enu mino, that there are different types that have different flavors. Rashi suggests that they could be, one of them is meat and one of them is shi'arei mincha. One of them is, let's say, a korban mincha. So you have meat and you have a flour offering. Distinct tastes. So now, interestingly, normally we say, if it's no sein tam, if you can taste it, so then it's usur. So we see from here, though, however, from our case, where we say that you can't give makis in this case, it must mean that the concept of no sein tam birov, that no sein tam, that if you can taste it, it's not deoraisa. Meaning, if so you have this, so you have pickle, you have noser. Let's say the pickle is meat, the noser is a flour offering. So theoretically, if this fellow is warned, hey, don't eat the mixture, it's pickle, so he should be able to get makis, because even if the pickle is the miut, right? We said it's going to join together in his mouth, pickle, noser. We don't know which one's going to be rov, which one's going to be miut. Who cares? If you could taste the meat, well, then that's significant. So therefore, technically, if this person is warned, hey, don't eat that, it's pigul, so you should be chayiv makis, because even if the pigul is the miut, if you can taste it, well, then it's not batul, and it's relevant. And you should be chayiv makis for the pigul if you're warned for the pigul. However, we say that he's not chayiv makis. So rather, what must that mean? That no saying tam birov, that if the pigul is the miut, but you can taste it, it's not d'oraisa, and therefore you're not going to be chayiv makis. No saying tam birov lav d'oraisa. We say no saying tam birov is not d'oraisa, because if it was d'oraisa, you should be chayiv makis. If you're warned for the pigul, because you can taste it. We say you're not chayiv makis, so it must not be d'oraisa. V'shmamina, and finally, right, so far we've learned that Isurin can be mevatel one another. We learned that no sin tam birov is not d'oraisa. And finally, v'shmamina asra safek lo shma asra. And we've seen the machlokas before, I believe Masechta Makis, maybe other places, about asra safek. Right, of course, in order for somebody to be able to get makis, he has to be warned that, hey, if you do this, you're going to get makis. So now in this case, the person was warned, hey, you're eating pigul, you're chayiv makis, but we said that it's asra safek, because we don't know if he's actually going to be chayiv for pigul. Maybe the noser is going to be the rov, and you'll be chayiv for noser. So since he's being warned for pigul, but we don't actually know if he's going to be chayiv for pigul, it's asra safek, and we're saying therefore he's not going to be chayiv makis. So it seems that asra safek is not a valid asra. I think it's machlekes of Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish, if I remember correctly. I might not remember correctly, but there was a machlekes. Is a doubtful hasra, a questionable asra, a valid asra or not? It would seem from here that it is an invalid asra, and therefore when the person is warned for pigul, he's not chayiv makis, because who's to say that he will actually be chayiv for pigul? Maybe what he'll be chayiv for is noser. So therefore the warning about pigul is asra safek, and we're saying asra safek lav asra, therefore he's not chayiv makis. Wow, this is a gewaldige ukimta, or a gewaldige teaching from Rish Lakish, that you have this person, he's eating pigul and noser together, and he can't be chayiv makis, because we don't know what to warn him for. And we learned three things. One is that Isers can be mevatel one another. The Iser of noser, for example, can be mevatel the Iser of pigul. We also learned that the concept of no sein tam birov is only midrabanan, and therefore even though you might be able to taste the pigul, it doesn't matter. And therefore if you're warned for pigul, it's not a valid warning, because even if you could taste it, it's not d'oraisa. And thirdly, hasra safek lav shma asra, and therefore if he's warned for pigul, it's going to be irrelevant, since we don't actually know if he's going to be chayiv for pigul, and even if he ends up being chayiv for pigul, the asra that he received for the pigul was what was essentially a doubtful asra, because we didn't know if ultimately he was going to be chayiv for pigul, and therefore asra safek lo shma asra, and therefore he is not chayiv makis. Givaldik. Okay, I'm going to drink a stick of water, then we're going to go weiter on this. This is an awesome sugya. Now, Mosiv Rave asks a question. That we have there's a Mishnah, right? We have a Mishnah in Masechta Chala. Mishnah Masechta Chala, Perek Gimel, Mishnah Zayin. Mosiv Rave asks, Osa Isa min chitin umin orez. If a person makes a dough of wheat flour and rice flour, so you have a dough of wheat flour and rice flour. Wheat flour would be chayiv in challah. Rice flour would not. Im yesh ba tam dogin. Well, if the dough tastes like the wheat flour, tastes like wheat, chayeves b'challah, then you have to separate challah, v'afagav druba ores, even though the majority is rice. So we see that you have this dough, it's a combination of rice flour and wheat flour. We say it's going to be chayiv in challah if you can taste the wheat, even if the wheat is the minority. So we're saying that even when you have a mixture and you have a minority of wheat, if you can taste the wheat, so it's chayiv in challah, says the Gemara d'Rabbanan. Yeah, chayiv in challah mid'Rabbanan, but mid'oraisa, the fact that you can taste the wheat is not important. However, Yochi, that's his aim of Seifa, Adam Yotze Ba'idei Chavasu B'Pesach. But the Mishnah in Challah continues, however. The Mishnah in Challah says you have this dough, wheat flour, rice flour. We're saying you'll be chayiv in Challah if you could taste the wheat flour. And not only that, if you could taste the wheat, you can even use this for matzah and Pesach. If you make matzahs with a dough, if you make matzahs with a dough comprised of wheat flour and rice flour, so long as you can taste the wheat flour, even if it's the minority, but you can taste it, you can be chayiv your chiyuv deoraise of be'erev toichlu matzahs, of eating matzah at the Pesach Seder. So clearly then, taste is midoraisa. The fact that you can taste the wheat, even if it's the minority of the flour, if you can taste it, well then you can be yotze your chiyuv doraisa of eating matzahs on Pesach. So clearly then, ta'am, tasting, is deoraisa. Okay. Well, if that's the case, then how do we understand Rish Lakish, who said that he's not going to be chayiv makis for the pigle and the nosor because we don't know what to warn him about? What about the fact that he could taste the pigle? Why is it asra asafik? It should be a good asra. If we're saying that taste is doraisa, so says the Gemara, you're right. Taste is doraisa. And therefore, if we were talking about pigle and nosor, that the pigle is meat and the nosor is a flour offering and they have distinct tastes, and you would be able to say that the pigle is meat, and hey, if you can be chayiv makis if you eat the pigle, and it's meat versus flour, it has a distinct taste, yes, he would be chayiv makis. Because tam birov, nosin tam birov is doraisa. However, Rish Lakish is talking about pigle and nosor, where it's min bimino. It's both meat. It's both meat. Both the pigle and nosor, let's say they're both goat meat. I'm going to drink a stick of water. And therefore, they both have the same flavor, and therefore there isn't a question of nosein tam birov, because they both have the same flavor. It's all goat meat. And therefore warning him, hey, you're going to be chayiv for eating pigle. Well, it's going to be a suffix because we don't know if it's going to be a majority of nosor, if it's going to be a majority of pigle. And the fact that you can taste the pigle, well, the pigle tastes the same as the nosor because it's all goat meat. Says the Gemara, Elamin b'she'eno mino b'taima. That when it comes to min b'she'eno mino, yes, if we're talking about pigle that's meat and nosor that's a flour offering, yes, if you could taste the pigle, if you can taste it, then yes, you would be chayiv makis. Because if you could taste it, then that's important. Min bimino, but when it's min bimino, beruba. But when it's min bimino, if it's all meat, well then it goes based on rov. It's not about flavor anymore because they both have the same flavor. It goes based on rov, and therefore if it's a majority of nosor, it's nosor. If it's a majority of pigle, it's pigle, but we don't know which is going to be the majority, and therefore he's not going to be chayav makis. Frag the Gemara, gevaldige kasha. Are you ready for this question? Are you ready for this awesome question? V'nishayir min b'mino kimin b'she'eno mino. Ditnan nisay bayayin ron ozo ki'ilu humayim. Friends, as we learned in our Mishnah earlier, we said that if you have blood from a korban and the blood gets mixed with water, so we said, okay, review it. So you have blood, you have water, min b'she'eno mino. red, clear. And we say so long as it still looks like blood, so you can do Zrikas Adam. If it doesn't look like blood anymore, you can't do Zrikas Adam. What if you have blood that gets mixed together with wine? It's min b'mino. They're both red. Well, we say, okay, in that case, well, let's treat it as if it's min b'she'enu mino. Let's say, okay, this quantity of wine, if it were to be the same quantity but of water, would it then still look like blood? And then we make our analysis based on that. We convert min b'mino to min b'she'enu mino, right, theoretically into min b'she'enu mino, so we could then make an analysis to determine if it would be kosher or not. So why don't we say the zel b'zachdu? Let's say the same thing here. Let's say, sure, you have pigul, you have noser, and they're both meat, and they taste the same. But why don't we say that when the person is warned, hey, you're eating pigul, you're going to be chayiv makis for that? Why don't we say, well, theoretically, if he was eating a kazayis of pigul and a kazayis of noser, and if the pigul were to be meat and the noser were to be a flour offering, would you be able to taste the meat? And if the answer is yes, so you should be chayiv makis, right? Even though it's min b'mino, we should view it as though we were min b'she'enu mino to make an analysis of, if that were the case, would you be able to taste the pigul? If the answer is yes, you should be chayiv makis, just like we say in the Mishnah. That even though we're talking about blood and wine, we view it as if it's water to determine if it would still look like blood, and if so, you can do zrikas adam. Again, v'nishayer, when it comes to the pigul and it comes to the noser, let us evaluate min b'mino, even though they're both talking about meat, but let's evaluate it kim min b'she'enu mino, as though it were min b'she'enu mino, as though it were meat and a meat offering and a flour offering. Ditnan, that we learned in our Mishnah, by the blood and the wine, nisarv bayayin, that if the blood gets mixed zusammen with wine, roino sokilu umayim, we treat the combination not as though it was blood and wine, but as though it was blood and water, to then determine if that being the case, blood and water, would it still look like blood? And my lavron also liyayin kilu mayim, and that what the Mishnah is saying, that we view the wine as though it were water, and we're saying, okay, now you have blood, you have water, so to speak. Would it still look like blood? And we should say the same thing over here. You have meat, you have meat and meat. But let's view it as though you have meat and flour. Excuse me, I'm going to have a little more water. To which the Gemara says, no. Lo. Roin also ledam kilu umayim. Interesting. The Gemara is going to immediately throw this out, but we say, no, we're viewing the blood as if it's water. So you have blood that gets mixed with wine. We view the blood as if it's water, to say basically it's bottle. You basically say that right, that it's bottle and there's no blood, it's possible you can't do zrikas adam. But if that's the case, bottle mi boile. When the Mishnah says nisayir b'yayin ro and also kilu mayim, should just simply say nisayir b'yayin bottle. The blood is bottle, but it doesn't say that. It says ro and also kilu mayim. Ve'od, and more so, Tani, we learned about so Yehuda, my sister Yehuda, ro and also kilu yayin adam. We have a brisa that we're about to see, which is talking about a scenario where you have a bucket. And the bucket is tummy. And in the bucket, there's white wine. There's white wine in the bucket. You have a tummy bucket. The bucket needs to be dipped in the mikvah. In the bucket, there's white wine. And the question is, if you're gonna dip this bucket that has white wine in it into the mikvah, is the white wine going to be preventing the mikvah water from getting into the bucket to purify the bucket? So Rabbi Yehuda says, well, what do? Well, we view the white wine as if it was red wine. So you have the mikvah water, and now you have this white wine. What do? Is the white wine going to be a chatzitza or not? Is it going to prevent the mikvah water from purifying the bucket? So we say, well, so says Rabbi Yehuda, we view the white wine as if it was red wine, and if there would be enough mikvah water to dilute the red wine so that it's weak and doesn't look like wine, so then the vessel is pure because it's being purified by the mikvah waters. But if it would still look like wine, when the bucket is dipped into the mikvah, if this white wine that we're treating as red wine, there's enough of it that it would still look like red wine, so then it would be preventing the mikvah water from getting into the bucket, and the bucket would be tamei. So we see that Rabbi Yehuda is saying that we take the white wine, we view it as red wine. So we would say the same thing over here, that the red wine we would view as water to contrast it with the blood to see if it would still be considered, if it would still look like blood. So again, V'od, Tani, we learn in the Brisa, Rabbi Yehuda, Omer says, Rabbi Yehuda, Rowan, also we view the white wine, Kilu Yain Adom, as if it is red wine, Im Dia Ma'eu, if there's enough mikvah water that it would weaken the appearance of the red wine, well then kosher, the bucket is tahor, because it would be considered like it was properly immersed in the mikvah v'im lav. But if the red wine would still be red, even after being immersed in the mikvah, it would still look like red wine in the bucket. Puzzle, it is not a valid immersion. So we see that it is, in our case with the blood and the wine, it's not that the blood is bottle, it's that the wine we would view as if it's water to see if the blood would still look like blood. So therefore, it's a gavaldige kasha. So therefore, back to Rish Lakish, when the person is eating the pigul and the noser, even if they're both meat, we should be able to give makis. If he gets warned, hey, you're eating pigul, he should be able to get makis for that, because even though the pigul and the noser are both meat, let's view the noser as if it was a flour offering, and now let's compare the meat with the flour. Would you be able to taste the meat? If the answer is yes, you should be chayiv makis. So answers the Gemara, Tanoi, that this concept of let's view the min b'mino as though it's min b'she'eno mino. In our case, let's view the meat and the meat as if it's meat in flour. It's taka machlokes tanoim. And that means also that our Mishnah, which says that when you have blood and wine, view the wine as if it's water, it's actually machlokes. Tanoi, it's taka machlokes tanoim. Desani, we learned in the Brisa, Dli, if you have a bucket, and this is the Brisa that we just saw, that we were just discussing a second ago with Rabbi Yehuda, with the white wine and the red wine. Deli, you have a bucket, sheyesh bo yain lovin, that has white wine in it, or chalav, or milk. Right, these are things that are a similar color to the mikvah water. Vidbilo, and now the bucket is tamei, you dip it in the mikvah. Now in the bucket there is this white wine or milk. Holchan acharov. So says the Tanakama, we go based on the majority. If the majority in the bucket is going to be mikvah water, so then the bucket is going to be tahor. If the majority in the bucket is going to be the white wine or the milk, well then there's a miut of mikvah water, and that's not, it's going to be insufficient to purify the vessel. So according to the Chacham, we simply go based on rov. So when you have min b'mino, right, you have the mikvah water, you have the white wine, they're both the same color. So you go by rov. If there would be different colors that we can contrast them, so then we would say, okay, we'll go based on what it looks like. But when you have min b'mino, you have the mikvah water, you have the white wine, they're both the same color. So you simply go by majority. If the majority of the water in the bucket will be mikvah water, tahor. If the majority would be the white wine, Tameh. It remains Tameh. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, but says Rabbi Yehuda, as we saw earlier, also kilu yain adom, we view the white wine as though it were red wine. We create that contrast. Even though it's min b'mino, we view it as though it were min b'she'eno mino. We view it as though it were mikvah water mixing with, interacting with red wine, and then we evaluate if the red wine would get diluted such that it would no longer look like red wine, so kosher. So then the bucket would be, the pail would be kosher. The imlav, but if it would still look like red wine, pasul, it would not be sufficiently dipped in the mikvah. So we see that it is taka a machlokas. What we do when it comes to visual min bimino, do we make it a theoretical min b'she'eno mino in order to create contrast and make a determination in the case of the mikvah, if it would be a kosher immersion, in the case of the pigul nenoser, if you would be chayiv makis, or, right, that's what Yehuda says, you said you create that contrast, but the Chacham say we would simply go based on rov. And in the case of the pigul and the noser, if they're both meat, and we're just going based on rov, we don't know. Is the rov going to be the noser? Is the rov going to be the pigul? We don't know what to warn him. It's asra safik. So safik lav shma asra. Drink a stick of more water. Now, Frag the Gemara of Ramini. However, we have a contradiction. We have a contradiction to Rabbi Yehuda's Shita. Right? Rabbi Yehuda had said, you have min bimino, we view it as if it's min b'she'eno mino to create that contrast so we can make an analysis. However, for Aminu, we have a contradiction. Dili shumale rokin, if you have this pail, this bucket that's filled with spit. Gross. Now spit is thick and it creates hefsek. This is not like white wine that is thin and is viscous. Viscous, I think, means like liquidy, I think. Spit is stark, it's thick. And it's going to create hefsek. It's if the bucket is filled with spit, it's not going to be tahor. The water is not going to sufficiently get into the bucket. So Tlisha Mali Rokin, if the I'm going to call it a pail, because I think a Dili, right, when it comes to like Mazel Dili, the constellation of the Dili, I think it's a pail. So I'm going to call it a pail. So the pail is filled with spit, bilo, and you dip it in the mikvah, kilu lo toval. It's as if it wasn't dipped in the mikvah. It's not a kosher tefillah. Miraglaim, if the pail was filled with urine, so the urine, we're just going to view it like water, and it's no problem. Ronoson kilu ein mayim. We're just going to view the urine like water. After all, it's called meiraglaim. It's called leg water. So that would be fine, not a problem. Now, mole mechatos. However, if the pail was filled with para aduma water, so now this is min bimino. You have the mikvah water, you have the para aduma water. The para aduma water is not going to be just, we're not just going to treat it like regular water. And now so it's not like the meraglaim where it's just regular water. No, the mechatas is going to, what does Rashi say? I'm reading Rashi, in avatuma, since the mechatas is an avatuma, right, makes people deal with it tame, as long as you're not the person being purified. V'chashive mishum kedushasayu lo batle ela beruba. So they're not going to be batel, the mechatos. So now what do you do in this case? So you have a situation of min bimino. So achi yirbu amayim al mechatos. So in this case, we're going to go by the rov. That if the majority of the water that's getting into the bucket when you dip it in the mikvah is going to be mikvah water, kosher. If the majority is mechatos in there in the pail, in the bucket, in the pail, then it's going to be possible. It's not going to be a valid immersion. So here, when it comes to the mechatas, which is min b'mino, we're going based on rov. We're not saying, well, let's view it as if it was wine. No, we're not doing that. And now, to kind of conclude our question, why is this a question? Because man shamis le de isle roin. Right? We had said by the Meiraglaim, we said roin osan kilo in maim. We view it as if it's water. Who's the one who talks about roin? Right? We saw in the previous price here, Rabbi Yehuda says, Roin also kilu yain. It's Rabbi Yehuda. Right? Manchamas le deisle Roin Rabbi Yehuda. It's Rabbi Yehuda who says, Roin v'katoni desagile beruba. And what are we saying? By the Mei Chatas over here, by the Efer part, by the Mei Par Aduma, we're simply saying we go based on Rov. We don't say, let's view it as if it's wine. So what's going on over here? On the one hand, when it came to the bucket that had white wine in it or milk in it, Rabbi Yehuda is saying we're going to view it as if it's wine, red wine, and we're going to take a look at analyze the colors. And yet, when it comes to the mechatas, which is also min b'mino, he's saying, oh, we're just going to go based on rov. Why not view it as wine and contrast the colors? Vikatoni sagile beruba, rov is enough. Amar Abaye says Abaye lokasha the day or the rabbi. Oh, so says Abaye. Actually, it depends if we're talking about the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda himself or the opinion of his teachers. The Sani that we're learning in the Brisa, Rabbi Yehuda Omer Mishum Rabbi Gamliel. Rabbi Yehuda says the name of Rabbi Gamliel, which is interesting. That Rabbi Gamliel, I always think of who is Rabbi Yehuda's Rabbi Akiva. But okay, I guess Rabbi Yehuda was also a student of Rabbi Gamliel. I guess it can make sense, right? It's the same time period, right? I believe that Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Akiva, I think, were relative contemporaries. So anyways, says Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Rabbi Gamliel, Ein dam mevatel dam, that blood is not mevatel blood. Ein rok mevatel rok. If you have spit of a zav, the ma'ayanos hazav, the spit, the urine of a zav is an avatuma like the zav himself. So if you have some spit of a zav, it would not be. So if you have tahor spit and zav spit, the tahor spit cannot be mivatal the tahor spit cannot be mivatal the zav spit. Vein meraglayim mivatal meraglayim, and similarly, when it comes to urine of a zav, which is also an avatuma, would not be bottle from tahor urine. So we see that Rabbi Gamliel is being machmir, right? He's saying that even if the spit or the urine of the zav is the minority, right? There's a lot more tahor spit or a lot more tahor urine. Still, we're going to say that we're going to treat it as an avatuma. So we see that he's being stringent, and that would also be when Rabbi Yehuda is saying that even when the wine is the minority, let's say the white wine is the minority, but we still view it as if it's red wine, and if it would still be able to hold it, still look like wine, so then it would be, the mikvah would be, it wouldn't be a valid immersion in the mikvah. Also, when it comes to the makis, we'd be able to give makis for the pigul, because we'd contrast the meat with the flour, etc. That is Rabbi Yehuda according to Rabbi Gamliel, who's more stringent. But Rabbi Yehuda, according to himself, would be like we saw with the mechatas, that it just simply goes based on rov. Rave Omar says, Rave, bidlisha tocho tor v'gabu tomei askin. And interesting, says Rave that when it comes to this brisa by the mechatos, this brisa by the water with the ashes of the paraduma, where Rabbi Yehuda, who says Rowan, is nonetheless saying it simply goes based on rov, and we're not treating it as if it's like red wine or whatever. It's because that Bryce is talking about a scenario where the pail is tameh from the outside, but tahor on the inside. So therefore, you don't need to be mitayr the inside of the vessel. The inside's already tahor. You only need to be mitayr the outside of the vessel. So what needs to be immersed in the mikvah? The outside of the vessel, and the water just needs to go right over the lip of the pail, of the bucket, of the pail. So we're not makbid on properly purifying the inside of the pail. That's not important. You just need to immerse the pail into the mikvah enough that that the water is going to cover all the sides and just go over the lip of the pail. So it says Rava again, bidli shetocho tor v'gabo tomei. We're talking about a pail that the inside of the pail is tahor, only the outside is tamei. Demidina sagilu b'choldu. That really, any amount of water that just gets over the lip of the pail, that's sufficient. The pail is tahor. V'rabbananu digrazu behu, but the rabbis made a gezerah that since in this pail there was the mei chatas of the parah aduma, and we're concerned that maybe you're going to want to salvage the mei chatas, you're not going to want to dip it properly into the mikvah, and the water isn't going to get over the lip because you're going to want to save the mechatos. So maybe you're going to want to save the mechatos below either maftil or matbil. You're not going to properly dip it into the mikvah, and the water isn't going to go over the lips of the bucket, and therefore the ika ribuya lo tzarich. But we say, however, just make sure that there's a rove of mikvah water in the bucket, and so long as there's a rove of mikvah water in the bucket, it's going to be the vessel is going to be tahor, and that way, if we're saying that there needs to be a rove of mikvah water in the bucket, you're definitely going to be immersing the pail enough that it's going to get over the lip of the pail. But that was just a din derabanan. So Rava would say, look, Rabbi Yehuda's shita, it's not just him quoting himself for his Rebbe. No, Rabbi Yehuda's shita is that when it comes to min b'mino, we would view, we would take in this case, theoretically, the mei chatas, and we would view it as if it was, let's say, red wine and contrast it. However, but because this is specifically talking about a scenario where the outside of the bucket is tamei, but the inside is tahor, and we really just need to ensure that it's getting over the lip. So by saying that, just make sure that you have a rove of water, that is just going to kind of accomplish what we need to make sure that it's getting over the lip. But it's unique to this situation of where the outside is tamei and the inside is tahor. On my Rava says, Rava, Amar Rabbanan b'taima, says Rava, the rabbis say three things. Number one, related to flavor. Number two, related to rove. And number three, related to visuals, what it looks like. Min b'she'eno mino b'taima. When it comes to min b'she'eno mino, when it comes to mixtures of like stew and chalev and pork or whatever, well then it would be b'nosein ta'am. Min b'mino b'ruba. When it comes to min b'mino, it's b'rov. Interestingly that he says that it's the Rabbanon, because I think that would be the Oraisa. I don't know. I looked at the Rambam. It's interesting. The Rambam in Hilchos Maichalos Asuros in Perek Tezvav, Halacha Aleph, he says it like this, that when it comes to min b'mino, it's based on rov. However, if you remember from Masechta Avodah Zarah, the conclusion is that even by min b'mino, it's based on ta'am, and even though min b'mino, it all tastes the same, so it would be based on shishim. So I think that the rov is the oraisa, but I think midrabanan would be based on ta'am as well. So interesting that he's saying that the rabbis say that it's based on rov. I'm not really sure. It's interesting. Maybe Tosfos says episode about it. And when we're talking about vision, so then if something looks different, if you have min b'she'eno mino, and you have you have blood and you have water, so then we would say, in the case of the blood, does it still look like blood? We would go based on what it looks like. Now, says the Gemara, Ufligad Rabbi Lazar, when Rish Lakish had said Right? I had mentioned earlier that we said that we learned three things from Rish Lakish. The first one is that Isur and Mevatlin Zeh, that Isurs can be Mevatel one another. The Isur of Nosur can be Mevatel the Isur of Pigel. The Isur of Pigel can be Mevatel the Isur of Nosur based on Rov. So Rabbi Lazar argues with that. Rabbi Lazar says, Rabbi Lazar Kshemshe ein mitzvahs mevatel zo, just like mitzvahs cannot be mevatel one another, as we're going to see in a second. Kach ein isurin mevatel zeh. Isurin cannot be mevatel one another, says Rabbi Lazar. Rabbi Lazar disagrees with Rish Lakish. He says, Pigel cannot be mevatel Nosur. Nosur cannot be mevatel Pigel. Man shamas leide Omar ein mitzvahs mevatel zo Hilleli. Now who says that mitzvahs cannot be mevatel one another? It's Taka Hillel. This Sanya, we learn in a Brayso, all of Hillel Azokin, they said about Hillel Azokin, show you, Korchan bevas achas, ve'ochlan mishum, shenem ramatzes rom yochlu, Chevra, of course, at the Passover Seder, Korech zecher kemikdash kehillel. That Hillel would take the matzah and the maror and he would eat him tzazamin, and he doesn't say that the maror would overpower or be mevatel the matzah. No. He would korech, he would wrap them together, the matzah and the maror tzazamin, as the pasuk says, al matzah sumorim yochlu, and he doesn't say that the mitzvah of maror is going to be mevatel the mitzvah of matzah because it's going to overpower it. No. Mitzvahs are not mivatel one another. Cheved, that was Daf Ayin Ches, and also half of Ayin Tes of Masechta Zevachim. I thought that was a phenomenal daf. I thought it was mamish geval. The whole concept of min b'mino, min b'she'enu mino, when it comes to visuals, the whole concept of saying even by min b'mino, treat it as those min b'she'enu mino, to create the contrast for the visuals. I thought it was mamish gevalt, a whole new way of looking at mixtures. We've always, I think, viewed mixtures as being about flavors, about being nosing tam. Over here, we're saying it's not just about being nosing tam, but it can even be visual. That even if something is the miut, but you can see it still, so then that will be relevant. Now, of course, there's a machlokas. So we said, look, when it comes to min, b'she'eno mino, we'll go based on the visuals. If you have dam and you have water, so we're going to say, okay, well, as long as it still looks like dam, we'll treat it as dam. You could do zukas as dam. But if it's min b'mino, if it's dam mixed together with yayin, with wine, they're both red. So the Chacham had said, look, you go based on rov. Rabbi Yehuda says that you would view the wine as if it's water, so we can then contrast the blood with the water and see if there would be the equivalent amount of the wine would be water, would it still look like blood? If the answer is yes, you could treat it as blood, otherwise not. Chevre, I very much enjoyed learning Daf Ayin Ches of Masechta Zevachim. I hope you did as well. Cheers.